I'm going to get straight into it because we've got usually loads to get done. And if you want to ask a question throughout, please feel free. And I will try to answer questions as I go along, but no question is a bad question. So please feel free to ask away. I don't mind at all. My name's Jennifer, and we're going to be talking about neurodiversity and advocacy tonight. So I just wanted to talk about me and why I feel like I'm the right person to be having this conversation with you, um, or at least one of the right people. I have been a speech and language therapist for over 20 years. I've been working with neurodivergent individuals for about 25 years, and I started when I was in college. And I have I'm the parent of two neurodivergent children. And the more I learn about neurodivergence, the more I'm coming to the realization that I probably have ADHD myself. And I have a lot of learning along those lines. And I'm learning not just about myself and my children, but neurodivergence in general and the neurodivergence movement. Um, and I think that's an important thing is to always continue to be learning. So let's go into what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to start with what is neurodiversity. We're going to look at neuro-affirming language, as well as how to advocate in different settings, either for yourself or for your child, um, as well as empowering resilience and self-education. So let's have a look at first, what is neurodiversity? So Dr. Nick Walker actually coined this phrase in around 2014 when she wrote something called Neurodiversity, Some Basic Terms and Definitions. And there's a link there at the bottom to her page and her website. What she said is that neurodiversity is the diversity of human minds, the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. So neurodiversity includes all brains. That means neurotypical brains and neurodivergent brains. So we wouldn't say I'm neurodiverse. If you have ADHD or you're autistic, you would say I'm neurodivergent. And we'll go into that a little bit because every brain is diverse. We're all diverse and every brain is neurodiverse. So neurodiversity talks about the fact that our brains are all different and we all have our own unique needs and challenges. Okay, so then what does neurotypical mean? So neurotypical really refers to people who have brains that function in like the normal way or as to most of their peers do. Um, More than 50% of the population in general. So people who are neurotypical, they tend to, this is generalization, but tend to develop skills like organizational and social skills. They develop it typically around the same rate as others, their age. So when children are given a standardized assessment, they're typically being compared to the neurotypical population or the people who met the 50% mark in these assessments. So that's why we find, say, these kind of standardized assessments aren't always as effective for neurodivergence because they were developed with neurotypicalism in mind, if that makes sense. So now that we have an idea of neurotypicals, let's think about neurodivergence. So when we talk about neurodivergence, we're really talking about people who process information and behave in a way that's different from, say, what we perceive as the norms of a specific culture. And for us, that would be our Western culture in Ireland, our Western Irish culture. Um, and it's a way for us to discuss the diagnosis, like autism, in a way that doesn't frame it as a problem or an illness. Okay. So previously, we'd be saying, these are disorders and there's something wrong with this person because they have ADHD, autism, bipolar, or whatnot, or even dyslexia or dyscalculia, because their brains work different. Now we're saying, okay, the brain is different from what's typical, but that doesn't make it wrong. So we're not pathologizing the person with the neurodivergence anymore. So we have to remember that neurodiversity celebrates all our brains. It's not a deficit. It's a natural and valuable aspect of human diversity. Neurodiversity includes neurotypicals as well as any and all, basically any and all brain differences. So autism, ADHD, oppositional defiance, OCD, dyslexia, learning disabilities, and there would be others who would put, say, brain differences like schizophrenia into this. We'll see as we go along what what gets put into the realm of neurodiversity. But I'd say, my general rule of thumb is if your brain has a different way of thinking or doing things to the typical way, then we're in the realm of neurodivergence. But neurodiversity celebrates all the brains. So when we're talking as well about how to support neurodivergent people, we have to look at the different paradigms out there. Previously, the principle and the paradigm that we used to focus on is what we call the pathology paradigm. This is our medical model of disability. And we're really then focused on deficits of the child or the individual. And oh, isn't it a tragedy? Isn't it? Oh, it's awful. They've been diagnosed with autism. Oh, isn't that? Oh, the poor dear. Well, yeah, that's a bit harming to the child, definitely. But and we also be looking at this pathology paradigm as a need to fix the child or a need to cure the child from this ailment that they suffer from. And there are charities out there who focus more on the pathology of a diagnosis rather than acceptance and support. So there was a charity called Defeat Autism Now, which really pathologized autism, as well as Autism Speaks, which has a view towards ending autism. And so then, with those kinds of outlooks, we're really looking at this tragedy. So we're trying to shift mindsets now to what we call the neurodiversity paradigm, where what we are putting forth now is that there is no right brain, there is no normal brain, and we're focusing on people's individual strengths rather than their diagnosis and this idea of tragedy. And we are supporting people's needs while celebrating their strengths. And we support those needs through their supporting their autonomy as an individual and what they need, as well as building in inclusion and respect for everybody and for everybody's brains. So when we talk about using neuro-affirming language, there's a couple different things we want to think about. We're going to look at choosing our words carefully, how we use labels, emphasizing identity and pride, um, fostering empathy and active listening, as well as understanding neurodiverse communication needs. So when we look at choosing our words carefully, we really got to just keep in mind that our language plays a really important role in how we're shaping perceptions and attitudes. I mean, if how many times maybe have you said to your child, or have you heard a teacher say, just focus, or why can't you just or maybe you've overheard, oh, he's just so sensitive, or she doesn't know how to do that. It's a very negative way to be talking to a child, and it can create lots of internal trauma for the child, as well as negative self-talk. If we're constantly talking negatively towards the child, they're going to start to internalize that negativity. So instead, we want to choose words that support the child. What does your body need to learn? Oh, I can tell you're trying really hard to use your words. Or I'm feeling frustrated. So maybe you're modeling some language for yourself. I'm feeling frustrated and I need a break. I'm going to go into the other room and take some deep breaths. I'm going to use my finger breathing now. So I'm modeling the language that the child could use eventually. Um, Speaking to the teachers, oh, do you know he focuses better when he's allowed to fidget, or she learns best when she's provided with visual supports. So we're providing support and using positive language to support the child's ability to eventually self-advocate as well. So when we're choosing the words that we use around children as well, and not just around them, but like when they're away at school, we should maybe be thinking about the words we're using because that will foster a way of thinking about them. But let's focus on their abilities, focus on their talents and the unique qualities rather than just the challenges. I know as parents of neurodivergent kids, it can be really hard and we can often get stuck on the negative and the challenges. Um, but we'll develop a much more healthy attitude if we then look at the successes and the positive and the abilities that our children have as well. And it is really important to focus and voice out loud those positive traits and characteristics as well. And with that, I just wanted to bring up a really helpful phrase that I say to myself anytime I'm in a situation, either if I'm frustrated or I'm in a school and maybe the children the teachers are frustrated, and there's a child who's having a hard time. And that quote by Dr. Ross Green is children do well when they can. And this is the mantra I live by. And I highly recommend if your child is having a hard time, tell yourself, children do well when they can. Children do well when they can. And that starts to help you to go, okay, he's not doing well. He can't do well. What can I do to help him to do well? And it gives us what we call a change in our lenses. Let's put new glasses on. Let's change our lenses and have a shift in our thinking as well, because your words really do matter. Calling a child lazy or manipulative, if a child's bouncing around the room, so they're disruptive. These are very negative things to say towards a child, but maybe the things that they're doing are they're being done in order to self-regulate, or maybe they're being done in order to show frustration, and we need to support them to get their needs met so that they can do well. So let's think about these words you might have caught yourself using, or you might have heard others using. Rude. Oh, he avoids work. He's a class clown. He's so argumentative. Um, these kinds of words aren't going to be beneficial to the child. Try to put those lenses on. If he's argumentative, maybe instead he's very good at standing up for himself. He stands up for what he believes in. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to reframe what we're talking about and the vocabulary that we're using around these children. I wanted to just talk briefly as well about labels. I bring this up because it was drilled into me in college that we should use something called person first language. Um, so it was drilled into me that I should not be calling people who are autistic people, because that was rude and you're focusing on their disability rather than who they are as a person, excuse me. And so this was something that I had to really learn about. Um, People first identity is where you're talking about the person with, so the person with Down syndrome, the individual with autism, the person with ADHD. But identity first language focuses on the labeling that diagnosis, and autistic individuals as a whole are saying that they would prefer to be called autistic rather than a person with autism because they are saying that they cannot separate their autism from who they are as a human and as a person, and autism is part of who they are, so they would prefer to be called autistic people. Again, this something might change in the future, so instead I'd like to ask people, um, now, of course, they're going to prefer to be called by their name, you know. So, but if I'm writing a report or if I need to write a letter in support of an individual and I have the ability to ask them and I'm needing to describe their brain in my report or my letter, I might say, would you prefer for me um, to say that you are an autistic individual, or would you prefer me to say you're a person with autism? What's your preference? So that I'm respecting their individual preferences. Um, but not all neurodivergent brain types have come out and said what they prefer. But the autistic community is generally very clear on this. Um, Although some would prefer to be called people with autism. So um, I would, in general, ask if you're unsure, and that's okay. So with the advent of neurodiversity, we're trying to change the mindsets of the world now, especially the Western world of like what's right and what's wrong, and that when you follow this pathology paradigm, you're following this mindset of these people are wrong and need to be fixed, where let's shift that to we're all different. Can we not have it what we need to be different? Can we not meet each other in the middle to support everyone? Um, and if we continue to see neurodivergence as negative, then our children will continue to see themselves negatively and talk about themselves negatively. And that leads to lots of mental health difficulties, which we want to try to avoid them having to live with. Um, and then I also ask you, as a parent of a neurodivergent child, potentially, and as also potentially a neurodivergent person, I don't know who's on this talk, but how much negative self-talk have you put on yourself that's a product of your potential neurodivergence? Um, and do you want this for your children? Think about how our parents spoke to us or how our grandparents spoke to us, and that becomes the language that we use to speak to ourselves. And if we don't like that language that we're using for ourselves, why would we want that for our children? So instead, let's focus more on fostering pride in how their brain works. Okay. Your child's neurodivergent brain is an integral part of who they are, and it contributes to their strengths and their capabilities. Yes, there are challenges, and we support those challenges, but there are also strengths and capabilities, and we want to support them and help them to feel pride in the great things about them. Um, and I did have a lovely talk with NeuroPride Ireland, and some of them did give me some support as well. And I would recommend, if you do have neurodivergent children or if you are a neurodivergent individual, to go on to neuropride.ie and learn more about how you can support your own identity as a neurodivergent person. Um, we do want to support children who have neurodiversities and neurodivergence as well. And how can we support teens and children in celebrating that neurodivergence? This is a little um, visual that I found that I just thought was really lovely. And I've got the link there at the bottom to an article about celebrating neurodiversity in children and teens. But we definitely need to educate ourselves about your children's diagnosis, emphasize, talk about their strengths, support those strengths, create that positive home environment where your children feel safe to say things to you or to be who they are within their own home environment. We want to encourage self-advocacy, which a lot of this talk is about advocacy, and we'll get there. Um, Look for role models for your child as well. There are role models who are dyslexic, there are role models who stutter, there are role models who are autistic. And if you look, you will probably find somebody who your child looks up to, and you can say, did you know that person's autistic too? And look at the strengths that they have, and look what amazing things they're doing. Connect with other neurodivergent individuals and communities, develop some coping strategies, find out what works for your child to help them cope through different challenges. That could be a whole talk on its own as well. We want to also look at some realistic goals that you can set. Um, saying my child will behave in school every day. Well, let's start a little bit smaller. Let's start with going to school. Let's start with asking to use the sensory room when they need a break. Let's start with little steps to get them to where they need to be or they want to be. Um, and we want to try to foster this growth mindset. So we're asking questions on how did you do that? How did it work? What do you think was the most positive aspect of the thing that you've accomplished? So we want to foster that their thinking and wanting to grow, as well as celebrate their differences and their individuality. Um, I think that's very positive and important to be able to talk to your children about what makes them different and what's great about that. Um, so next, we're going to just dive a little bit into neurodiverse communication. So a very helpful mom, when I asked the NeuroPride group, what do you think is important for when we're talking about advocacy in neurodivergence? A mom said, much of my life I believed that I was stupid, but it turns out I needed more details, context mentioned, and put across in a more direct way. So this is a neurodivergent person who has a neurodivergent child. And I think that's really important, that we understand that often neurodivergent people need more context, needs more support, and when we're communicating to them, as well as how we can help them to communicate also. And so when we're supporting communication, let's think about some things that might help. So if we provide visuals to support the individual, and support their understanding and their communication, that can be really helpful. I think, Cats, we do have talks on using visuals to support. That could take me a couple hours to go through in detail, but making things visual when you have a neurodiverse individual and they're having a hard time, I always ask myself, can I make it visual? And that even goes with my own children. If they're struggling, I might I might actually send a text instead of talking because then it's visual. Sometimes that helps. Can I provide access to augmentative and alternative communication, AAC? And this is a big one. I know autistic PhD ladies who have they're very well spoken and they can talk on neurodivergence and they are very passionate, but they will also say some days I'm just not able and I need to use my talker, and then they will communicate with their AAC device. And iPads have lots of different options for high tech AAC. um, and again, this is something that we could go into lots of detail, and if you're ever questioning how to use augmented communication with your child or how you can use it for yourself, definitely get in touch with a speech and language therapist who has AAC experience, and they'll be more than happy to talk you through the first steps. But we also want to be as specific as possible and avoid, say, sarcasm or figurative language. Because the autistic individual or the neurodivergent person is often trying to figure out the context and what you're trying to say. So if you say something that's very vague, like, can you pick up your coat? Well, that's asking a question that the answer is yes, I can pick up my coat, but you didn't actually ask them, or say, I need you to pick up your coat and hang it on the hook. That's being specific. So we have to think about what we're saying and can we say it in a more direct way to support the individual's understanding. Um, Now, our sarcasm, figurative language, it's raining cats and dogs. This stuff is a part of the world. So it's a hard thing to just never use figurative language when you're around, say, a neurodivergent person. Um, but maybe if you're using sarcasm, you might then preface it with, "Oh, I was being sarcastic there," or explaining what sarcasm is, um, as well as when you're using figurative language. Oh, it's raining cats and dogs out. Do you see the storm? That's a really big storm. So that the individual starts to understand, okay, what she said is not what she meant, but that can be really confusing. So if you see that a child isn't understanding, maybe shift what you've said and explain or be more specific. Use that direct language instead of talk around language. In Ireland, we love to be uh, we love to talk around things like, "Oh, I could sure use a cup of tea," right? Instead of, "Could you please make me a cup of tea and bring it to me?" Um, so when we're Okay, so the next thing we want to do as well is encourage people to speak up, and encourage your children to encourage others to speak up. Okay, so if they didn't hear what was said, encourage them. Can you repeat that, please? Or I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Can you give that to me in more detail? Rather than having them feel like they have to try to figure it out in their brains and have stress and anxiety over, am I getting this right? Well, let's learn to speak up for ourselves. I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Can you give me more detail? Can you be more specific, please? Absolutely, we do want our children to be able to speak up when they don't understand. We also want to foster and empower empathy and active listening. And we want to be empathetic and demonstrate active listening to our children because connection is so important and we want our children to feel connected to us and feel like we are a safe space for them where they can come to us with anything they need. um, and so if your child does come to you and open up about an experience, try your hardest to listen with empathy and try not to be judgmental because we don't know the whole story. We don't know what's going on. But if you come back at them, well, with what did you do? Or could you have done anything different? Why did you do that? They're going to feel very judged and they mightn't give you the whole picture, or they might feel that they can't talk to you. And that's something you definitely don't want. But you can ask questions to understand their feelings and perspectives better. Um, when you shouted at your friend, how were you feeling in that moment? What feelings were going through you then? Or it sounds like you were really frustrated. Um, did you have any of your emotional regulation tools with you at that moment? Um, so you're able to just really, you're not judging, you're asking questions to see if you can gather more information in a safe way, which fosters trust between you and your child. Um, and this connection with your child and fostering this listening and empathy are the key components of something called collaborative problem solving, which is a model by Dr. Russ Green, who is the one who said children do well when they can. And he has a book called The Explosive Child, which I have in a link later on, or the name of it as well. And that can be a very helpful tool for talking through problems, or if your child is having a challenging day or there's something challenging happening, collaborate with them on what specifically is the problem and lead with empathy. And I think that's so key is we always have to lead with that empathy because, our kids have it hard, so we want to we want them to know that we got their back. And I think that's probably one of the most important takeaways from today is for our children to know that we've got their back. So let's talk a little bit about advocacy. And we're going to start with schools. Our children can often struggle in school because schools typically are created with the neurotypical brain in mind. So if you have a neurodivergent child, you might find that school can be much more of a challenge. So collaborating with the school is so important. And I don't know if you're a teacher and I don't know if you're a parent, but collaborate together for the success and mental well-being of the children. Um, as a parent, you want to ensure that these supports are in place as soon as possible. So try if you can, like before they even start school, you might be meeting over the summer to discuss inclusion and the support that your child needs before school starts. Have those meetings and get plans in place right away. School refusal, or I like to call it school can't. It's not that they're refusing to go to school because they don't want to. It's because there's things that are happening at school that make them can't go. Then their ability to go, there's a creates a block. And their neurodivergent kids tend to have more school refusal, school can't than other populations. So if we can get the supports in place early, we might find that they do better and they have a better experience. Um, so the development of the IEP or the individualized education plan can be really helpful on for outlining your child's unique needs and the strengths and accommodations that they need. And I've got a link coming up for you on that. We really need the more communication between the parents and the teachers, the better. And that could be an SNA, that could be the teacher themselves, it could be a principal or a learning support teacher who is fostering this communication. And that could be through like a communication book that comes home, you write in it, and then the teachers write in it. It could be emails that you send back and forth, or apps that the school uses like Aladdin or Class Dojo, where you are able to communicate with the school. That could even be the case if your kiddos had a really hard morning, and to be able to send a message and saying they're having a tough morning, they need a little bit more empathy today. So, watch out for pushing them too hard, or you might have a hard day with them in school as well. But don't be afraid to ask for a meeting. This is where parents need to be the squeaky wheels. Yes, so speak up. If something's not sitting right with you, speak up and advocate. Um, and teachers as well. You can model advocacy for your students. So um, if you're in school and you see a child in your classroom is struggling, you might model for them and advocate and model advocacy. I see that this is hard for you. Do you need your strategies? Or even saying, oh, I'm really frustrated by the fact that that we're going to have a fire drill today. I'm very nervous. I think I need to put my ear defenders on just in case. So if you're modeling it and um, showing what the child could do, that might encourage them to speak up for themselves as well when they have a need. Um, okay, I'm showing you something that I actually created this for my son. I changed his name and everything, but um, I have a child with ADHD, and they're in third year, and they have different challenges in school. So I wanted to make sure that the school had accommodations in place and that they knew exactly what my child needed. So I printed this out and handed it to every single teacher that my child has so that they know what needs my child has, what struggles there are, and what are some accommodations that would help with these struggles in class. Um, so sometimes you can just create something and hand it in. I said be the squeaky wheel. I'm the squeaky wheel. I'm the noisy. I'm the loud parent. And sometimes we put stuff in place to support our child. And I just wanted to show you this is something you can do if you're finding that accommodations aren't being made. Sometimes you need to put them in writing and say why and what you can do about it and what the child needs to be done about it. So that's just a little visual for you there. Feel free to screenshot it if you want to. Okay, so in regards to the IEPs, the NCSE has a guideline on IEPs. So this is helpful to have um, so you can see kind of the guidelines that the school is working towards when they're creating an IEP. Um, and if you feel like the school maybe isn't too sure about IEPs, print and send in this document or email it to them and say, here's a guideline on IEPs. And if we do have any teachers, I'm going to be an advocate for all children all over Ireland right now when I say, please never, ever, ever take away a child's recess. Um, Children need to move and they need brain breaks and they need that time away from the curriculum and from the big, loud, noisy classroom. And if we take away their recess, it's going to foster more challenges and more frustration and more mental health difficulties. So, um, even if a child is misbehaving and not doing well because they can't, we don't want to punish them with taking away that recess. It does not lead to improved behavior. I can tell you that now. How can we advocate at home? And this is really in regards to advocating towards, say, extended family members who may not really understand neurodivergence. Um, and in this case, education is advocacy. So you might need to talk to your family about your child's diagnosis, the differences and how they work. Educate your family on the importance of using affirming language rather than that pathologizing negative language and share some stories with your family to help them better empathize and connect with your child. You can also model. Again, I'm going to say the word model lots because modeling is so important, but we can model how to advocate for our child. So um, Christmas is coming, so we're going to have those big family dinners. And maybe you have a child who's got selective eating or ARFID or something, and Granny is saying, "Well, she'll eat when she's hungry." Hmm. Well, if you have a child who's a selective eater, you know darned well that they would rather starve than put something with yuck factor into their mouth. So instead, we model that advocacy. So no turkey for me, please, but I'll have another roll. Or Sean doesn't like being hugged, but he loves high fives. For those aunties who really love to hug all the kids, we're voicing what the child could say when they might say it eventually. I hope that makes sense. Um, and speak up for your child, okay? Um, it might mean you ruffle some feathers. It might mean that you frustrate somebody who is older than you, or you might frustrate somebody younger than you as well, but somebody who thinks that children have to behave a specific way. Um, and we know that not all children behave that way, and we should allow them to eat what their body needs and not be forced to hug and kiss people they don't want to hug and kiss, if that makes sense. So go ahead and advocate for them and speak up for them. In public, I don't know how many of you have met those helpful adults when your child is maybe having a meltdown. Um, and they're not really helpful, waiting at the bus and your child is on the ground screaming and they're going, "Oh dear, what's wrong? Oh, would you like a sweetie?" And you're going, "That's not actually helpful, but how do we advocate in these situations?" It's okay to say, my child is having big, strong feelings right now and he needs some space. He needs to be left alone to have his big feelings calmly. Okay, you're speaking up for your child. You're advocating to these helpful adults. Um, you could also join neurodivergent affirming groups in your area if there's local autism groups or ADHD groups. Have a look because they are out there. Um, I can't give specific ones because I don't know where you're coming from, but there are definitely like I know in Dublin there are definitely groups out there for families to join. Um, and a lot of these groups are promoting awareness within the community. I know the Dublin 12 parent support group for autism, they've created a bunch of sensory boxes and they're handing them out to local areas like the CCMA and the local libraries have just been given these beautiful sensory boxes. And that's promoting sensory awareness and sensory neurodivergence in the community. Um, and I think that's fantastic. We can also advocate by supporting the other parents and the other parents of neurodivergent kids. So you can be an ally. So maybe you're not the parent of the child having the meltdown, but you see the child having the meltdown in the grocery store and the parent sitting on the floor hugging that child. Um, it could be as simple as giving them a smile and saying, "You're doing a great job." Sometimes that's just what parents need to hear, or creating that safe space and supporting that parent. Um, if there are those helpful grannies out there who are trying to help the parent with giving unhelpful advice, you might then step in and say, "Actually, this family needs some space. Can we just create some space for this family to calm down and take time for themselves?" So sometimes if we see this in the community, we can jump in and be an advocate and say to the parent, "What do you need? What can I do for you right now?" Or, if the mom's purse spills out because they're trying to support their child, pick up their purse and clean it up and hand it to them. It's those little ways to advocate and support ourselves and each other in the community. We also, little by little, want to help equip our children with self-advocacy skills. So we want to try to teach them to express their needs and preferences. And that could be through the use of visuals or modeling. Again, model, model, model. Um, Model what you need, voice what your child needs. Um, and you can also advocate for yourself as well. So if you're in your fields and you need to take a break, it's really important for you to be able to say that. And do you know what? If you ever get a chance, if you have the smallies, watch Bluey because Bluey's mom is fantastic at self-advocacy. Um, and of course, mine are too old for it, but sometimes I might watch it a little bit too because it's a love letter to parents as well. Um, but we definitely need to slowly show our children that they can speak up for themselves. It might mean if your child is not verbally speaking, it might mean watching their responses to things and then speaking up for them or giving gestures or law of signs. So, if they're trying to play with their toys and line them up and somebody is trying to move them out of the way and they're getting frustrated, then you might say, "No, stop. I like my toys in a line." So you might voice what they would say if they could. And, with that modeling, then your child might eventually, "No, stop." They might try to do that. Um, so the more we model, hopefully you'll see that advocacy coming out through them. Again, be that squeaky wheel. So this is just a little bit about Ireland now, specifically. Um, in Ireland, ring. Like if you're trying to get supports and services for your child, ring those services, email those services, follow up. If they've got 30 days, contact them at 30 days and say, "How are you getting on with getting me an appointment?" Link in with your TDs. They want to see your child succeed as well. So do contact them if you're having a hard time. Um, if you are new to the journey of neurodivergence, you can do something, you can refer your child to something called an assessment of need. Technically, the HSE has 30 days in order to complete it. And if they don't, you can complain and you should complain because if we don't complain, we won't make a change. Um, so keep that in mind. If you're wondering what an assessment of need is, you can talk to your local primary care center and they can link you in. They can give you the assessment of need form. You can find it online as well. But that's a good way to get the ball rolling on finding out if there are supports that your child does need. Um, Now, the neurodiversity collective that I spoke to, they were very adamant that I say to families, get private therapy. I'm not saying that because I'm a private therapist, but the wait list in Ireland can be very long. So while, yes, we understand that there's a cost to private therapy, if you can support your child through private therapies like SLT for communication, self-advocacy supports, OT for meeting that sensory regulation need, um, if you can get some support in that way, fantastic. Um, Now, it is a health expense and you can claim it back through your income tax return. So there is something to that. Make sure if you get a private therapist who's an SLT or OT that they're registered with CORU, CORU. And it used to be there was a Med 1 form you'd complete, but now it's just through your income tax return in general. You also do want to look for therapists who are engaging in neuro-affirming practice, um, and looking away from like behavioralist approaches where we're looking at the child as a whole and supporting their needs um, holistically rather than saying do this and then you get that. This again is a big long conversation I could have, but I don't have the time, unfortunately. Um, and then you can look into the private insurances as well. I'm not sure about others, but I know like VHI does have packages where they provide 75% back on private therapies. So if this is something and you're thinking of going down the private route, you might find that it does make sense to get some private insurance as well. Sure. Okay. Um, Also, if you do have a child who has a high level of needs and supports, there is something called the domiciliary care allowance. Um, and it could be used to help pay for therapies, and it's something that you can apply for. It is a very long and laborious and tedious process. Um, and unfortunately, when you fill it out, you have to say a lot of negative things about your child, which I have a big problem with. Um, because it's not neuro-affirming. Unfortunately, in Ireland, if you want to get the DCA, often you have to be very negative towards all of the challenges that your child has. But there is a website, a Facebook group called DCA Warriors. If you're starting this journey of applying for a DCA, then this group can be very helpful on learning about the DCA process. And I would recommend you looking into it if you're on Facebook. We have a little bit of time to just look at empowering that resilience and confidence in our children. So the three little areas we're going to look at is just celebrating their achievements, encouraging that self-expression, and fostering those social connections. So how do we celebrate achievements? Well, let's recognize those achievements, no matter how small. We want to celebrate them because that builds the self-esteem. And we want to build our children's self-esteem and encourage them to take pride in themselves and the things that they've accomplished. And we want to really focus on the effort that they've put in rather than say the product. So like we're avoid like, oh, good job. But instead of good job, wow, you really use big, beautiful, fluffy clouds in your picture. How did you get those fluffy clouds so bright and big in your painting? To allow them to explain what they did and the effort that they put in. So we could even say, you worked so hard to get that finished. I'm so proud of how hard you worked. I'm impressed. This is fostering that growth mindset again. I'm impressed that you kept trying even though it was hard. Um, and then ask them what they liked about their achievement. What was your favorite thing about making that cake? How did you enjoy that? What did you like about it? So you could even ask, is there anything you do differently next time? It's not a judgment, but if they feel safe, they might think about it and go, actually, I'd put chocolate sprinkles instead of rainbow sprinkles on the cake. No problem. And we want to encourage that self-expression. Our neurodivergent kiddos and the neurodivergent population overgeneralizing, tends to be a very creative group of individuals. And that could either be through art, through writing, through music, through dance, even through, sports as well. I know that's not necessarily creative way, but they could be very good and express themselves through their sports. And that can be very therapeutic for our children. So we love to find the thing that helps our child to encourage their self-expression and um, and encourage them to do it and participate in those activities. Um, as well as encouraging that self-expression, we do want to encourage that those social connections as well. Everybody needs a tribe, and sometimes we have to help our kids find their tribe. It might be in school, it might be outside of school, but we do want to help them build those friendships and connect with peers who understand them and who accept them for who they are, and our children accept their peers for who they are. Um, and we want to encourage the peer groups as well to learn about each other's brains and how their bodies and brains work as well. Because it's not just the neurodivergent children that need to learn about neurodivergent brains. The neurotypical population needs to as well, because if we're not learning from each other, then nothing's ever going to change. So we definitely need to be collaborating and working together and learning about each other. Um, if you're a parent of a neurotypical child, invite that neurodivergent child to the birthday party or for a play date, because neurodivergent children don't often get those invitations. And so they really often appreciate getting them. Even if they're too anxious to go, they still appreciate getting the invite. And if you're a parent of a neurodivergent child, invite the neurotypical kid over for a play date. Why not? We can, again, there's ways to foster those play dates as well. So let's get people together and let's find those things that our child loves to do and get them involved in them. Whether it's those music lessons, baking lessons, sewing lessons, Pokemon trading card club, why not? Youth groups, D&D, adventuring. There's so many things that your child might be into, and that's where they'll find what I call their tribe and find the people who they connect with and build those lifelong friendships with. We also need to think about self-care. And I'm speaking to the parents here. Mind yourself, mind your mind, because parenting is really hard. And it's extra hard when you have a child who doesn't fit the socially acceptable norms out there, okay? Um, because we know how hard it is for our kids, and we want to support them and give them the love that they need to be happy and successful in their own ways. And sometimes we forget about ourselves in that. So um, we need to think about what ways we can mind ourselves so that we can be there and present for our children. And we also have to keep in mind that, again, what were people saying to us as children? How are we being spoken to? What kind of trauma did we live through from how we were treated as potentially neurodivergent children? Um, well, we didn't like that, so let's not put that on our children as well. Can we shift our way of thinking so that we're using positive language on ourselves as well as our children? What have you got for yourself to refill that bucket of yours so that you've got something for your children left for your kids? Um, I just wanted to bring up there is a lovely group here in Ireland called Family Carers Ireland, and it's only €20 to become a member for the year. And they offer lots of different things, but one thing that is on the list of supports they offer is counseling. I think it's 6 sessions of counseling, which I think is just can be very invaluable to people who are struggling to support their child, support themselves, support their families, and they need that little bit of time to talk and reflect and get the counseling. So I would recommend them. I know As I Am also offers supports as well if you're an autistic family with autistic kids. Um, but Family Cares Ireland looks at all families who have somebody in it who is a carer, not just the neurodivergent world or the autistic world. Again, I encourage everybody to always keep learning. So if you have a neurodivergent child, or if you're a teacher who has neurodivergent kids in the classroom, and if you're a teacher, you will have neurodivergent kids in your classroom. Full stop. That's just how it is. So you want to be looking at what we can always do to support. So that The Explosive Child was the book that Dr. Ross Green wrote, and he's got a website called Lives in the Balance. And he talks about his collaborative problem-solving method in on the website as well as in the books, which I think are pretty cheap on Kindle. Um, there's also Neuroclastic, which is an autism-led resource site as well. So Neuroclastic can be really helpful if you're looking for autism-specific supports. Before we finish up, I just wanted to do a quick thank you to the Neuro Pride Ireland Facebook group and the moderation members there, because I did ask for some guidance before I provided this talk. And they are a very helpful group as well. So if you are um, a member of a family who has neurodivergent children, then Neuro Pride Ireland might be a nice place for you to connect to. Um, I also have some websites, and I think some of them have probably been earlier in the talk I gave. So there's the Dr. Rose Ann's Campana Hodge for 11 Ways Your Teen Can Embrace Neurodiversity. I know I put that up earlier, as well as the Neurodiversity Basics by Nick Walker. And then what does neurotypical, neurodivergent, and neurodiverse mean? And that's from Medical News Today. I think they are all up earlier, but in case you wanted to screenshot this, there I put them all in one place for you. So feel free to screenshot in the next, say, 5 seconds, which means if you're on your laptop, you click the things that says print screen or PRT SC is what it says on mine. Inclusion Ireland supports people with intellectual disabilities in Ireland. There is a high correlation. There are a lot of neurodivergent individuals who also have intellectual disabilities. So I thought this might be helpful for some parents who are here. So I'm just going to open it up now. If anybody has any questions, I will do my best to answer.
Jennifer, there was one that asked when you're talking about the accommodations you done for your own kids,
Hmm.
asking how open was the school and teachers to the accommodating all of the needs you listed?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, so it's a mixed bag, to be honest. Um, the principal was great. She was like, absolutely, I'll make sure everybody gets this. Um, and and I think for the most part, people are open towards it, but you have to keep asking, are they still being followed? So my child's school was happy to have the document, and they were very welcoming towards it. But I still have to jump in if something's happening. So I do jump in and go, do you know what? He's not being allowed to listen to music, and you said he would be, and that's specifically happening in this class. So can you link in? So I'll talk to the special needs coordinator and say, can you link in with this teacher to let them know that in his accommodations he is allowed to listen to music as long as it's not disrupting the rest of the class. Um, so it is a mixed bag on how um, how receptive schools are, but I put it in a very friendly way. Like you can see how I am. I tend to be like, "Hey, I just have this for you. I thought it might be helpful, so I made this for you." And so here's the accommodations. I'm happy to go through it with you. And I am going to go through it with you in my happy, cheerful voice so you know that I'm not a dragon mom, but I am kind of a dragon mom anyways, but I'm doing it in a cheerful way. Have some cookies, right? So sometimes I kill with kindness.
Jennifer,
Absolutely.
a question just came in if you want to quickly
I
read.
just see that. I'm going to have a quick read. My granddaughter was on a guide weekend away last week. She had a bit of a meltdown. She was helping in the kitchen, but they got smoked bacon instead of normal bacon. Ah, no. She doesn't eat smoked bacon and couldn't process the leader gave out to her. Yeah, I would definitely say something. This is where the advocacy in public comes in. Um, that scout leader doesn't recognize the children do well when they can, and your child and your granddaughter wasn't able to do well there. So I would have a chat with that scout leader, or maybe sometimes, do you know how I was talking about providing visuals? I might provide a visual to the scout leader on on challenges for your granddaughter and how you can accommodate them within Scouts and say, like, look, when things are different, when my granddaughter has expectations and they're not met, that can be very emotionally difficult. And this is what happens when there's a meltdown. So instead of being angry at her, maybe we can sit and connect with her and find out what's wrong. But yeah, I would definitely say something. Yeah, just because somebody knows a person has a label doesn't mean they really understand, unfortunately. The number of times my ADHD son was told, could you just sit down and focus? Would just sit down. He's like, I can't sit down. I can't focus. And he's having to speak up for himself. Um, it doesn't matter necessarily people know the diagnosis. They often need specific feedback and guidance from us on the needs of your child too. It's not just our kids who need that specific feedback. It's often the community as well. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming and have a lovely evening.